Hello, and welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, History Buttons. My name is Aaron, I'm your host, and on this show, what I do, is I make badges or buttons, and I talk about where the designs came from. They're designs from history or topics having to do with history. Today we have the coin. We have a coin from the reign of Sviatoslav I of Ukraine. He was, I guess his official title was Prince of Kyiv. He was kind of the one who kind of consolidated what we consider to be Ukraine and part of Russia. But a lot of what I'm going to talk about is stuff surrounding him. Sviatoslav was the third official prince of the Rus. Now the Rus were there's a lot that's said about they were Norse, they were Vikings. The Rus have a tradition from the north, and now that at least that's what the historical records say, and I find there to be a lot of truth to that, because you look at what the Rus did there versus what they did in, say, in what's today Scotland, and what they did in France, and you see a lot of similarities. Now there's a particular document called the Primary Chronicle, which was supposedly written by a monk named Nestor, and he was in like the 12th century, and theoretically he's writing from documents that we don't have, that have been lost since then. The Primary Chronicles are just the oldest one, but there's some dispute as to whether Nestor actually wrote it. They don't really know who wrote it, and certainly it was compiled a while after all this happened. The foundational myth is that the Norse came in, they did the usual Norse stuff, tried to set up shop, and were kicked out by the locals. And like a generation later, the locals were like, you know what? We kind of need some leadership. We kind of need somebody to come in and teach us how, to be cultured and civilized and stuff. Which really, I don't know of any time in history that somebody's actually said, hey, come in and take us over like that. And you could say, that they invited people to come in to protect them for somebody else, and that's about the extent of it. But the foundational myth says that they said, okay, don't send in an army, just send like a couple people. And so down from what's now Sweden came Rurik and two friends. Rurik ended up being kind of the prince among them, and he had but it was basically just a couple of cities at that point, and it's not like people there were really united in any way. The whole is part of the kind of steppes culture that extended all the way over into China, and basically you'd always have this tribe at the top that dominated things, and you had the tribes under them. And in fact, I'm going to go back further than that. I'm going to go to about I want to say around 265 AD, when there's a group called uh, the uh, the Ruran the Ruran Khaganate was established, and it was this huge thing that stretched most of the width of Asia. It was huge, and it had and that's how it was set up. And then later on, there's another tribe called the Chinese called the Ashina or Ashina, and they, so according to the Chinese, there were 500 families called the Ashina or Ashina who were relocated north of a particular river, and they led a revolt within the Ruran Khaganate and ended up on top, and they reformed themselves as the Go-Turks, and that was the origin of the Turkish people as we know them today, the Turkic people. And they were wildly successful. The Go-Turks went from almost all the way over to the Pacific, all the way over to the Caspian Sea. A huge amount of territory. And in the meantime, the clans and tribes that didn't want to associate with them were pushed west into what's now the Ukraine and Bulgaria area. And they had a very different kind of thing. When we think empire in the West, we think of, massive roads and fortifications and things like that. A lot of infrastructure, a lot of, well, both physical and social infrastructure. And that wasn't what they were doing, really. It was more of a confederation of tribes that was ruled over by a group called the Ashina. And one thing that this is that anybody who called themselves Kagan or Kagan or however you want to pronounce it, it could be spelled Khagan or Quagan, depending on where it comes from. And they had to be, in order to have that title, you had to be blessed by the Ashna tribe, so that they could that's how you got that title. And the Go-Turks split because, having an empire that vast with no real centralized infrastructure is problematic at best, and they ran into problems. So they split between East and West. The Eastern Go-Turks were taken over by the Tangs, by the Tang dynasty in China. And the western part became split into various groups. The Avars, the main ones were the main group was Khazaria, which again, you had one tribe at the top, and they ruled over many others. But by this point, you had Christianity, you had Islam, you had the pagan groups, and so on, and they all were part of Khazaria. And Khazaria was, for a couple centuries, a hugely powerful trading empire. And it's kind of interesting to me. They had the Khazarians had this. They had a double kingship. One was kind of the sacred king that was at the very top, the Grand Kagan, and underneath him was his deputy, which was the more secular man of the people kind of guy. And the in order to be Kagan, according to Khazar tradition, according to Khazar rules, they strangle you. They strangle you until you told them how many years you would reign for. You would get the job for that many years, and then they kill you, and then they'd select somebody else that they wanted to lead them. So it was so you had the power of the king, but it wasn't dynastic. It wasn't like you'd find in Western Europe at all. There wasn't a sense of, oh, this. You had the clan at the top where all the leaders came from, but other than that, it wasn't like you were anointed by heaven. You were chosen by the people, and then you died when your term was up. But I wasn't able to. It occurs to me now that I did not find any reference as to whether, was it voluntary, as in you said, I want to be Kagan, and then they strangled you, or if they came knocking and said, all right, you're a guy, and you're like, can I not be? Because I kind of like, not being sacrificed. I don't know how they came to the, how they came to that decision as to who to strangle to be king. I'm sure it was a great honor. It wasn't like life was easy back then or anything, so, I mean, what else were you going to do? Go fight and die in a battle, die of some weird pooping out your insides disease or something? Weren't a lot of good options. So, there probably wasn't the resistance you'd find today. But a lot was written about the Khazarians by the Byzantines, and oops, that one is not going to work. It's got that little thing here. Everybody around thought that they were pretty hot stuff. Sviatoslav ended up kicking their butts, brought them crashing down. Kyiv itself had been taken already, I believe, before Sviatoslav came up. It was a Khazarian hill fort defending their frontier. But it was on a major river that they wanted for trade. Sviatoslav was raised by the guy who preceded him was Oleg, who was a kinsman of Rurik, and Olga was Oleg's wife. Oleg died because he was greedy and stupid. He got the tribute that he was owed by a tribe, and then he was like, you know what, I want more. So he went back, demanded more, but he only took like a few of his men back and sent the rest of his men with the tribute they'd already collected, and the tribe killed him. And then they did something really cheeky. They sent a message to Olga saying, "You're now a widow, and by the way, since you're lacking a strong man to guide you, we propose that you marry our prince, who, by the way, is also the guy who killed your husband." And Olga was not too happy with that. And so she invited their diplomat. She invited them to send a diplomatic mission up to her to her city, and they did. And remember, all this was on rivers, right? So they weren't arriving over land; they arrived by boat. And it's like, okay, wait here in your boat. We're gonna go prepare a feast to welcome you, and we will carry your boat in as a tribute to you. And they're like, awesome. And Olga had them dig a deep trench. They carried the boat in on their shoulders, tossed it in the trench, and buried the diplomats alive. Olga then sent a messenger back to their tribe and said, "Okay, everything's been worked out. We're ready for the wedding ceremony. Come on up." So they sent the prince who had killed her husband and his entourage showed up, and she was like, "All right, y'all stink. We have a nice bathhouse over there. Go in, relax, clean up, take your time, you know. Then we'll commence the celebration." And so they did. She had her people nail up the door and set fire to it and burned everybody inside alive. And then she took her army and basically went through, and every one of them that resisted she had killed. And then she besieged their capital for like a year, and it was like, and then sent the people in the city a message. Oh, everyone else has surrendered. Everybody is out tending their fields and just living life. I may have overreacted. My bloodlust has been sated. All I want is a small tribute from you. If you are willing to allow me to take my army and leave without continuing this war and killing you all, just send 6 sparrows and 6 pigeons from each household as tribute, and I'll consider everything forgiven. And so they did, and that night they took balls of sulfur, tied them with strings to the legs of the birds, and set the sulfur on fire, released the birds, went back to their nests, which were, of course, in these different houses, and they burned the city down. And then Olga was like, all right, we're good. And for that, and then she raised Sviatoslav from a young age. She was a very successful queen regent. And for all of this, she was later canonized by the Eastern Orthodox as Saint Olga, and she is a patron saint of not sure if it's just Kyiv or Ukraine in general, but that was the first hint of, you don't mess around with these people. As Sviatoslav came of age, she was like, okay, I'm done. I don't need to do this anymore. and he took over. And this is from a coin from Sviatoslav's reign. It is the first version of what they today call the tryzub. And the tryzub is kind of the, some people call it trident. It's a seal of Ukraine. And the interesting thing is that there's all sorts of speculation about where this came from. Obviously, this isn't a trident. I'll show you a sneak peek at a future one. This is from a coin from a future, about 200 years later, I think, maybe only 150 years later. This is much more like the Ukrainian trident. You can see that three prong thing, and there's been speculation that the tryzub is because these were Norse. The Rus were Norse and were associated with the sea and with the ocean, and the trident is a symbol of the sea and of the ocean. And others have said, well, it could be that this kind of looks like a bird in flight, especially like a falcon. And the gerfalcon is something that's definitely found in Sweden and is considered a symbol of stuff. But this is the first version of it that we know of associated with the Rus. And this is also found in Khazaria. It's a Khazaran symbol. And it only has the two prongs. And that really, and it could be that the whole, Kyiv was what started out as a Khazari hill fort. And it could be that including the symbol was either because it was a symbol of dominance, of, we took your symbol, now it's ours. Or it could be a symbol of, a lot of our people have been Khazari. And maybe this was to kind of mollify them into, accept that, we accept you as part of the Rus. It's everything was tribal, and symbols are very important in unifying tribes. Some people have said, well, the bird thing, and it could be a dove or some other form, some other peaceful thing, and I don't find that persuasive at all, because this was the 900s. Nobody was using symbols of peace on their currency. That would not have been something the Rurik was Norse. He was of Norse stock, but nobody else was. The Rus were very quickly culturally integrated into the population, and so it's not like a situation in, say, England where Norman French was the court language for a couple centuries. It was you had individual identities between the tribes, but they were all Rus. Some of them were noble, some of them were not. And that's another thing, is that they adopted the European model of dynasties as opposed to the steppe um, culture of well, no dynasties, and everybody just, you just select a Kagan, who a Kagan is selected somehow by uh, by a by a council or something, and that's kind of been a um, um, that's kind of been a dividing line there between steppe culture and European culture, and the line has often been blurred because and it's modern Ukraine is basically stretches from Ohio to the Atlantic coast. It's a pretty big place, and if you don't have modern lines of communication, Europe is a small place compared to the U.S. A really small place. You had all these tiny little principalities during this time that were kind of making a patchwork, and the principalities would be absorbed into larger entities, but it's really, really hard using the kind of technology and the kind of infrastructure that existed at the time. It's really hard to build a united, a single entity out of this. And so you had, for a long, long time, tribal identity, or what we refer to as tribal identity. They probably not the term that they use there, but there wasn't the sense of we are all one people. Symbols like this would help. I mean, again, it's a Khazari symbol that was used by the Rus, either as a form of dominance thing, as in, haha, we beat you and now your stuff is ours, or more likely, we really don't want to have to go to the trouble of reconquering you again, so we'll just adopt something that's important to you, so you feel that you're a part of us. Not that people would be fooled by that or anything, but just to be made to feel included, perhaps at a level that they hadn't been under as part of Khazaria. History is rarely straightforward. You can't confine yourself to just what one source or what one country has to say about themselves. Most of the records of this time come from the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire, and they go back and forth with the Franks to the west, the Germans, about whether the Rus had a prince or a king or a Kagan. So there are people who speak of a Rus Khaganate that preceded the Principality of Kyiv. Honestly, I think that all that is red herring. I don't think that there was a Rus Khaganate, because I don't think there was a Rus identity before the Norse arrived in whatever capacity they did. I don't accept the primary chronicles assertion that they were invited in to rule. I think that the primary chronicle is very much a document, at least that part of it, to legitimize the Rurik dynasty and its hegemony over all of these different people. We're here because you invited us. We're here because you wanted us to be here. And so we're forever legitimized. Very much like the Arthurian tales were basically written to legitimize Norman rule over England. William the Conqueror or William the Bastard was, according to the genealogy provided in the original Arthurian cycle, he was a descendant of King Arthur, illegitimately, but that's what gave the Normans legitimacy to the throne of England, something that didn't actually exist until they made it, because before then it was just a patchwork of little kingdoms, just like what was going on in what's now Ukraine at the time. There's a patchwork of little principalities and cities that dominated the local area, and I think that there's probably truth in that some Norse came down and kicked some butt and united everybody into a something like a functioning kingdom or empire, dynastic in nature, but also strong on trade, because the Norse were big on trade, and you see that in pretty much everywhere they decided to settle, was that they, like in France, they were the Normans, but they became very French. They adopted the French language. They also did things that nobody else was doing, like building in stone. That was not a thing that people did, but they built these big stone castles as a way of showing dominance, I think. But that's pretty much entirely new, and that made them a lot stronger than everyone else. And they built kingdoms where they went. They were mercenaries that were used throughout Europe. There was a Norman kingdom in Italy. They invited somebody invited Norse mercenaries to come down and fight for them, and they ended up staying and building a kingdom. And so that's just kind of what they did. But again, the Norman kingdom there became part of the whole tapestry of Italian culture. That's what they did. They went in. They were Norse. They brought some things from their home culture, but they quickly assimilated into the local population. But I don't think that means that, you don't say that, then that means that the Rus were Norse. They weren't. They initially were united by Norse, but they were within a couple generations they were inherently they were pretty much assimilated into the local culture. Sviatoslav ended up reigning only about 10 years. The Byzantine Empire, the Byzantine Emperor paid one of the local tribes to ambush and kill him while he was on one of his rounds of tribute. And this is something that really kind of one of those things where I guess he was expected to show up in person to demand tribute on his own behalf, but that's the second prince in a row, Prince of Kyiv in a row that they lost with doing the tribute rounds. But that was life back then. That's what rulers had to do. So, but Sviatoslav was the one who conquered Khazaria. He conquered, I think, Bulgaria as well. Not the Bulgaria we know today. The Bulgars were another nomadic steppe people that had been pushed out by the Khazari, and they were to the west of the rivers, and I think it was the old Great Bulgaria is what they call it, and so he conquered two big neighbors that really kind of it didn't define modern Ukraine, but geographically, but it came pretty close. I think it went up a lot further north. Volgograd was I'm not sure if that was Sviatoslav or if it was Yaroslav, but Kievan Rus would expand to all the way up to the Great White Sea, to the basically the Arctic Ocean, before it would fall. So it was this huge place, and it had a lot of different people in it, and that's something that you continue to see today in Ukraine, as opposed to, say, Russia, is this greater acceptance of minorities. And one more thing about the Khazarians is that it's said that their ruling tribe converted to Judaism. And the reason why they converted to Judaism, it is said, is because they had, of course, they had Christians and Muslims among their subjects, and they wanted to. They were intrigued by monotheism. They thought that was a good way to go. Empire builders often like something. They tend towards monotheism because the whole united authority thing. But they were really turned off by the Christian and Muslim missionaries. Y'all are just too pushy, and so they converted supposedly to rabbinical Judaism because they weren't pushy. And so I just find it interesting that although modern Ukraine has very little to do with Kyiv and Rus, which is and the reason for that we'll cover later on, but Khazaria was ruled by a Jewish tribe, although not one of the tribes of Israel or anything, but a tribe that had converted to Judaism, and Ukraine today has a Jewish president. And it just speaks to I think the diversity of the area that gets lost when we talk about the Eastern Europeans and the Slavs, and there's always been a much bigger mix. It's never been a monolith of culture and identity the way that we in the West tend to see it, because we're not from there, right? We're not taught their history. We're taught our history and what we consider to be part of our tradition, and that rarely includes Eastern Europe. And part of what I'm doing with History Buttons is just trying to shed light on some of that stuff. I'm not an historian. If anything, I'm trained as an applied anthropologist. I find symbols like this to be interesting, especially their evolution over time. Now, one of the things I find interesting on this coin is Sviatoslav was pagan. Olga was Christian, but Sviatoslav was pagan. But you see right here, there's a cross there. And I don't know whether that is a Christian cross, or if it's a symbol. There are these other symbols. The coin that was found was very worn, and it's a lot smaller than this, so a lot of the detail has been lost. I also printed this out in black and white rather than trying to color it. I tried some different color palettes on this, and honestly, anything just washes out the detail. And we don't, the making a coin color just didn't do anything. I tried doing blue and yellow, and that was intriguing, but it seemed to lose its kind of the historical character of it. So I just kept it with a plain black and white. And what I'm doing with these is I'm going to be going to downtown Kansas City and selling them for $1.50 each. My wife does a lot of my partner does a lot of does artwork, and I'm setting up a booth for first Friday of the month, which is an event in the art district where vendors can go and pop up a table. You pay $25 ahead of time and pop up a table, and you'll be there all day selling on the sidewalks. And I'm taking these, and 50 cents from each button is going to go to demining Ukraine and other places as well. But so that's kind of why I started out with Ukrainian, with an old Ukrainian button. And next week I'll be talking about another chapter from Ukrainian history, using another button as another coin. And I'm not going to stop at Ukraine. This is just to get me started. I don't know exactly what I'll be talking about over time, but there's a lot of history out there, a lot of symbols, a lot of things that can be talked about. We maintain a small store online called at unicornpromise.com, where you can find my buttons for sale. And again, the same deal, 50 cents from each button goes to demining Ukraine and other places. And right now I have a very small art selection online. I was going to see what sells at the booth. This is the first time I've been there, and I didn't want to add a whole bunch of stuff that would then be, now all this stuff is being sold both places. But by the time this is uploaded, that'll be over with, and I'll probably have a lot more stuff up on the website. And well, there you have it. That was History Buttons episode 1. Press like, subscribe, whatever, you know the drill. And I hope you will join me in the future. Thank you.